and so you should hear that the recording now is in progress. And then we will go ahead and get started. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Harold. If anyone cannot see the screen, please let us know through the chat. You'll see in the menu, there's a chat where you can talk and put your information. And then also, as you come up with questions and comments, you can type those into the chat area, and then Dr. Griffin and Dr. Adams will address those as we finish up the presentation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Harold and Alla and let you get started. So welcome, everyone.
Good morning. This is Harold. Alla and I are going to be tag teaming this presentation, so I'll kick us off. We appreciate your being able to attend. Hopefully you'll find this interesting, maybe helpful. What I want to do is just basically identify or talk about some of the trends that we're seeing in business schools. And this is really across the country. We're seeing a little bit of a scaling back in programs. And much of this is due to some declines. You know, we're seeing declines in international enrollments. We're seeing some declines in domestic enrollments. Some of that's because students are opting not to take on additional debt. So they're a little risk adverse, and they don't want to take on any additional obligations, debt, financial obligations. You know, and then there's also maybe a perception that there's not a need for an MBA or an MHA, Master's in Healthcare Administration. We're also seeing some movement in the direction of doing more specialized credentialing as opposed to generic, so going into finance or accounting or economics or business analytics. So because we're seeing this general decline in enrollments, that's having an adverse effect, particularly on state universities and colleges. They're seeing some cutbacks in the state appropriations to these institutions. We're seeing a lot of enhanced competition, primarily in the for-profit sector, trying to really snag some market share. Therefore, there's kind of this greater need for us to focus on recruitment and retention strategies. And we need to take more of a broad-based approach to recruitment and retention. So when we look at just the literature, so if we just do a basic review of the literature, there's not a whole lot, quite frankly, when it comes to graduate program recruitment and retention. There's a fairly decent amount of literature out there on undergrad. So that was the first shocking thing. So when we're looking for some support from the literature on what maybe are some best practices out there, we didn't find a whole lot, we being part in the College of Management. So there's not a lot of well-defined, articulated recruitment plans available. And what I thought was really interesting is that when you ask faculty, you know, if they believe that part of their role as a faculty member is to assist in recruitment and retention efforts, generally there is. But what's ironic is that we're not leveraging that. So administration and programs aren't really leveraging the fact that faculty feel that that is part of their obligation. Not maybe the majority of it, obviously, but certainly they have a role. But they're not being tapped into as a resource to help with those initiatives. And like I said, we just found there's very little literature out there. And it's really unfortunate because that's really a critical part of institutional survival. Even if it's just like a self-preservation thing should be kicking in, that there's this need for us to do more in terms of recruitment and retention. And we should be leveraging our faculty in those efforts because they really have an ability to positively contribute. So there was no empirical evidence, but what we did is we did publish an article on this very topic, kind of a case study approach of what was done in the College of Management at Park University to really boost the headcount and credit hour generation for the graduate programs in business, which included the Master's in Healthcare Administration as well as the Master's in Business Administration. And I believe you should have been provided a PDF version of that journal where we published that article. So to give you a little bit of history about the graduate programs in business at Park, this was prior to academic year 15-16, we saw fairly stagnant growth. So the faculty went back 3 years. So we started academic year 2012-13 through academic year 14-15, and we saw flat growth. We didn't see any contraction in our numbers, but we didn't see any growth at all. So I suspect if we had gone back even further, we would have seen a very similar pattern. And this was both in the MHA program as well as the MBA program. So we pulled this information together, and I think it was a little bit shocking for faculty. When you're teaching your courses, you're teaching them, and it looks like you've got a fair number of students in your classroom, so things must be okay. But when you look at those numbers in aggregate, and you look at that over time, what you're noticing is that things are not okay. You know, really, if in business, if you're stagnant, that's a negative thing. You're not progressing, you're regressing. You know, so we needed to find ways in which to break that pattern. So what the faculty decided to do, and this is the business school faculty, we decided to really approach this from a low-cost, no-cost strategy. We knew that if we were to go to administration and say, look, we need more of this, we need more money for marketing, we need more money for infrastructure, we need more money, all that it would do is, it's like you're promising you're going to deliver increased growth, although the data shows stagnation over the last several years. So in order for us to be able to get more resources, we need to at least show that we have the potential to grow. And so that was really our focus. What are some low-cost, no-cost strategies we can do to boost recruitment and retention in the graduate programs in business? So this presentation is going to be to kind of walk through some of those approaches that we use to achieve some sustained supernormal growth. The outcomes here, the learning outcomes, is we want to really help you to examine the role and the impact that faculty play in recruitment of new students into graduate programs in business, and examine the impact that faculty play in the retention of existing students. Really begin to understand the importance of making data-driven decisions versus gut reactions, and then gain some insight by sharing some best practices in terms of faculty involvement in recruitment and retention efforts. Okay, so just to kind of give you, before the faculty got involved, so before there was any real faculty involvement, what were we doing in terms of on the recruitment front and on the retention front? First of all, faculty weren't involved in recruitment initiatives. They weren't asked to be involved in recruitment, so what we found is very consistent with what we saw in the literature. We weren't asked to be involved in recruitment. We weren't encouraged to be involved in recruitment, so that was one of the things. Admissions, graduate admissions, really took more of a hands-off approach when it came to interfacing with prospective students. Everything is through the internet. So students submit their application through the internet. They would receive reminders each week from the system. System generated reminders of things that were still missing from their application file. You know, once they got their application file completed, then they'd be receiving an acceptance letter, you know, or they would receive some letters generated, you know, several weeks down the process saying that we're still missing some elements. Unless they actually physically pick up the phone and call admissions, they wouldn't have any touch connection with admissions. So we lost the personal piece. And for a liberal arts college, and that's an important part, is building the relationship, even as they're a prospective student. We weren't engaging in any stitch-in activities. So what we want to do is we want to have activities designed for people who've been accepted but not yet begun the program, to kind of make them feel included, to feel a part of the community. There was no clear strategy for boosting graduate enrollments and credit hour generation. So we had no strategy. There was nothing formalized. Admissions had some recruitment goals and targets, but those weren't really shared with the program. There's no institutional definition of what a reentry is. And reentries are students who had begun the program, and then for some reason or no reason at all, they just dropped out of the program. And they've been out of the program for a while. So it's not like they were just taking a break. They've been out for at least 3 or so consecutive terms. Park uses term structure versus semester. So we do 8-week terms versus the 16-week semesters. And so we had no definition for reentries, and they make no effort to go after those students to bring them back into the program and really encourage them to finish what they began. So there's no coordination in enrollment and credit hours between admissions, marketing, and academics. And really, the way we see this is the programs really should be setting the goals and targets when it comes to how many students we need each term. And then this should be coordinated through marketing, because marketing has to then find ways in which to generate the leads we need. And then that should be communicated to admissions. So admissions is getting the leads that they need, and they need to convert those leads to hit the goals that academics, the programs, have established for their program. So those 3 functional areas have to work together, but really it's the programs that need to set those goals. Admissions would unintentionally, and this is completely unintentionally, provide some misinformation about the program, and that could then really hinder recruitment efforts. It's not intentional. They have lots of programs they're trying to manage. We changed the programs. They changed, they would evolve. Courses would be redeveloped, changed, deleted, put in new courses in their place. We changed some of the admissions criteria. We're communicating it, but it's just so much information coming into them, they would unintentionally provide some misinformation. And we would later find out about it when we follow up with prospective students who never really materialized. On the retention side, so now this is how do we obtain these existing students? Our student success coaches, we have a department, a functional area that's dedicated to helping to support students throughout their time with Park. So they can connect them to appropriate institutional resources for support. If they're having some challenges outside of school, then they can connect them with other resources that might be able to help them navigate through that. They would coordinate and talk with faculty. What they didn't do is really take a very proactive stance when it came to our at-risk students. So when we would admit students in conditionally, these are students who didn't meet fully the GPA requirement, but the faculty agreed to admit them under a conditional status, which gives them so long in which to generate a certain GPA, otherwise they're no longer in the program. They weren't following up with them. Or for students who are put on low grade warnings or put on academic probation, those are students you would think student success would routinely monitor and follow up with, but that wasn't happening. Students were allowed to drop within the first 4 weeks with some tuition refund. And remember, we're 8-week terms, so they're allowed to drop within that first half of the term. Not only is this not good for students in terms of keeping them on track in terms of progression to graduation, but also we use a team methodology in the courses. So those teams are together working on projects, whether they're in a blended format or entirely online. And so when a student drops out halfway through, that really not only compromises their ability to be successful, that potentially could compromise the success of the teams for which they were a part of. Our student success would send out more email reminders about the last day to drop than they were letting students know they needed to sign up for courses in upcoming terms. And then we made the process so simple to drop. All the student had to do is just send an email to their success coach, and then they would push the drop button. Faculty weren't notified. The only thing we got is we got an auto-generated notification, usually sometimes several days after the drop took place, that the student had been dropped out of the course. We had no shot at trying to reach out to that student and see if we can help them and support them in staying in the program, staying in the course, and being successful. Faculty were not involved in student retention. Okay, so I don't know if it was intentional. I think it's just a practice that evolved over time, but really weren't involved. Again, we were just notified when they dropped. And then again, student success would occasionally provide to active students some misinformation about courses in the program. And that would, of course, cause some level of anxiety amongst the students. But again, completely unintentional. And then there's no real coordination on retention. You know, retention fell into the purview of student success. So we weren't really involved. We weren't encouraged to be involved in that. That was something that they handled. And I'm sure you all have never experienced any siloism in higher ed. This is their turf, their area, and they don't want others to play in their sandbox. So we were experiencing some of that phenomenon. But I'm sure it was just us. Nobody else has ever experienced that before. So to give you a little bit about these graduate programs in business, prior to academic year 15-16, stagnant, flat growth. You know, that's just what it was. I mean, we weren't seeing, even if I went back several more years, we would have seen the same pattern. You know, and lots of programs have been experiencing stagnant growth or some contraction in their credit hour generation, their head counts. You know, for reasons we talked about. You know, there are lots of reasons for that: increasing competition, reluctance to take on additional debt they're going to have to service when they graduate, this perception that they don't need it, that it's just, that's an optional credential, nice to have, but not something one really needs in order to move up. So we fell into that same position. So we came up with some low cost, no cost. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry, excuse me, the other way around. Here's the data. Here's the data. This is the actual data when it comes to the academic year 2012-13 through academic year 14-15. And you see the different color bars, that represents the terms. Since we're 8-week terms, we do 5 starts a year. There's 2 in the fall, 2 in the spring, and 1 in the summer. And I just inserted a line of best fit. But what you can see out the ANOVA, the F-test result, is that there is no statistically significant difference between those years. They are, in fact, flat. And what you see on the left side are the head counts in the credit hour generation for the MHA program, the Master's in Healthcare Administration. And on the right side, you're seeing the MBA head count in credit hour generation. They're flats. You know, so that's just, when I think the faculty, when I showed this to the faculty, I think this really triggered a sense of urgency. Okay, I think when you talk about, we need to really start to grow the program, we're concerned that we're not seeing the credit hour generation, it doesn't really necessarily resonate. But when you actually show the graphics, you show the statistics there, it really begins to build that sense of urgency. So what that means here is you're going to see inflation. So our costs, our input costs are going to go up. We have to then increase tuition to offset those. Or we need to find ways to really break out of this cycle, this pattern, and really start to see some material growth, but without incurring a lot of additional expense, unnecessary expense. Okay, so here's what the faculty decided. We were in a meeting and we went over the data. We all had this sense of urgency. Okay, so then we figured out, well, what are the priorities? What are the things we need to really focus on? And so we came up with 6 things. One, we need to streamline our processes. Some of them were kind of complicated, so we needed to streamline them. So a little bit of lean management here. We need to look at, do we need to develop some new products? You know, and products being our curricula. So do we need some new product? Do we need to enhance our existing product? Third, we needed to focus on service delivery. We need to make sure that if we're going to develop and spend time and energy developing new product, that we can deliver the product and achieve the desired outcome. So we wanted to focus on recruiting and retaining and developing some really solid talent from a faculty perspective. We needed to build an infrastructure to support the growth. In the past, I personally have run graduate programs where I've achieved some rapid growth and experienced some infrastructure collapse. So I've done that, don't want to do that again, because then you're trying to maintain the growth while rebuilding infrastructure, which is really challenging. So we wanted to make sure that when the time was right, we had built in an infrastructure to support the growth. And this is a timing issue. You can't go to administration and say, we need all these resources with the promise that we're going to see some growth. So if you just give me this, then we'll see growth. It needs to be, show me some growth first, then come and talk to me about spending some additional resources. Number 5, we needed to develop a marketing and public relations strategy. And we can't do it obviously by ourselves. We had to work closely with the marketing department. But you know, what's the good of having new products, redeveloping products, coming up with a new pedagogy, you know, having these wonderful faculty, but not having a way in which to get the word out. And then finally, we needed to develop a retention plan that really incorporated faculty in a very meaningful way, and that involved not just academics, but involved student success, and also other areas, you know, like, because there are lots of reasons why students leave. It could be financial aid related, so we need to have financial aid to be a part of the process. It could be issues in which the registrar's office could be helpful, so it really needs to be collaboration. Retention is a very complex process. There are so many reasons why students choose to not stick with the program, that we need to make sure that we're kind of collectively ready for whatever those issues are, and we're working together to try to address them. So here's just the timeline. You know, and this is just a timeline. I'll go through this a little bit more in detail, but you can see for each period, fall 1 of 2015, we really kind of kicked this off. And then in fall 2 of 2015, we began doing some other parts, and you can see the general timeline. I wish these were all done in isolation, where we could just focus on certain action items, you know, in fall 1, and then have those done and move on to new action items for fall 2. But as you know, it doesn't work that way. So you're just basically adding more stuff to the plate, but you can't let anything off because you still got to work through it. So we have multiple things going on, really for the first couple of years. So you're constantly redeveloping new product, or developing product, redeveloping existing product, hiring and onboarding faculty, and assessing faculty, and streamlining processes, and just all of it's being done concurrently. But this is when we kick them off officially. And I'll cover each of these in a little bit more depth here in just a second, starting here. So first thing we did on our list of 6 is we need to streamline that internal process. So what we did is we decided as a faculty, we're doing the low-hanging fruit. We're not going to start getting into processes that are going to involve multiple functional areas, because then you're getting into the internal politics. It gets bogged down in bureaucracy. You've got people fighting to keep hold of things they've always been responsible for. So we said, let's focus on things that we really have control over, and let's make those better. So the first thing we want to do is focus on the admissions requirements. Admissions doesn't define who gets in or doesn't get into your program. Faculty have to determine what the admission requirements are for their program. and what of those admission requirements are predictive of a student's success in that program. So we looked at it, and we used to require you had to get the application. We didn't require a standardized exam, but we did require the application, required the fee unless it was waived. We required 3 letters of recommendation, required a resume, we required, of course, the official transcripts. Faculty went through it, and we looked in the literature, so what's predictive of success? So we ended up taking out the letters of recommendation. We took out, I think there was even a personal statement, took that out. We removed the need for a resume or CV. So what we're left with is you need to have the application with, of course, the fee, unless it was waived, and your official transcripts. Those really, we thought, were necessary for us as a faculty to determine whether or not a student was capable of academically succeeding in the program. That helped eliminate the third bullet, which was this virtual pipeline. We literally had 71 students, applicants, in a pipeline waiting for something to come in, whether it was 1 letter of recommendation or 1 official transcript or a personal statement, a resume. So we have 71 sitting there clogging this pipeline because they're waiting for some document, and a lot of those documents aren't even things we needed to predict a person's ability to be successful in the program. We created a provisional admission status. We didn't have that before. We did a provisional admission. So if the student had unofficial transcripts, so they didn't have the officials, but they had unofficials, we would allow them into the program to take, I think it's 2 terms of courses, and at which point we had to have the official transcripts in their file. So a little bit more work on the admission side to track that, but that helped us unclog this virtual pipeline and cause us a boost in unduplicate headcount and credit hours. So that was something those are easy things we could do to get things moving along, to give us some of that initial momentum, that inertia. We looked at developing new products and improving existing products. So what we did is we did a comprehensive program review. I think the MBA program, we looked at 29 MBA programs across the country. For the Masters in Health Administration, we looked at 17 similar type programs or like programs across the country. We looked at several factors: the curricula, the admission criteria, the tuition costs, fee structures, whether they were accredited through a programmatic accredit or not, who that was, several criteria. We also did some market research. We looked at what the industry was expecting from new MBA, MHA graduates, what were the competencies that they were expected to possess when they entered the market, what types of opportunities would be available to those individuals, and what would be the requisite competencies they would need to be successful in those roles. So just a very thorough program review, and from that, we ended up redesigning a lot of the core curriculum within the program. We ended up taking some courses out. We developed new courses that needed to be in place. We took the 4+1, the MBA 4+1 program, which wasn't done quite right, which basically allows an undergrad student to take a certain number of courses from the graduate program, then use those to satisfy the undergraduate requirements, but also concurrently gives them a head start in their graduate studies in that program. So we fixed the MBA 4+1, and then we developed an entirely new 4+1 program for the MHA program. We created sequential degree option. So it allows students who finish one graduate degree to immediately or later pursue a second graduate degree at Park and receive 12 hours in course substitutions from the first degree to the second. And that was the first time this had been offered at Park. We expanded the concentrations. The MBA had 4 concentrations in the MBA program. We expanded that to 9. We developed some new concentrations. All of them are 12 semester hours in size. But then we also borrowed some concentrations from like the Masters in Public Administration program, and they likewise did the same thing from us. And then what we did is for all the concentrations that were available to MBA students, we made those same concentrations available to the MHA students. Because remember, MHA is the business side of healthcare delivery and related industries. So it makes sense. And as we develop new concentrations, we always looked at that in terms of what would have mass appeal. So that we would offer to not only the MHA students and the MBA students, but maybe even the public administration students as well. So that way you don't have to worry so much about the dilution of these concentrations, because you're now having more students coming in from different programs to populate those courses. And then we allowed students to transfer in hours, graduate hours, from degrees that had been conferred. Sometimes schools, they'll allow 9 hours of transfer in credit from one grad program to or from prior graduate coursework into a graduate program, but not if those hours had been previously applied towards a conferred degree. So we did some research, we did a white paper, and we found that there were a number of schools who accepted 9 hours in transfer even if those hours had been applied to a conferred degree. So we adopted that same policy. And then what we did is we used kind of a different approach on the redevelopment of those courses. We're preparing people for operational roles in a variety of settings. So we use a team approach to develop and redevelop courses within our curricula. That's both the MBA and the MHA. So we have a course developer, you know, who's really your project manager. That's either an adjunct or a full-time, and that person's kind of the paid person. They get paid for the development. Then we have some volunteers. There's always somebody with operational experience who has subject matter expertise, but operational background. Then we have another person with subject matter expertise, and then we have the area coordinator. We have area coordinators for every discipline within the graduate programs in business. And then, of course, we had our instructional designer, who's a member of the team. So we always had this team methodology, so that it's not just one person who's developing this course in kind of a vacuum. They're developing this course, but with the support of others to make sure that this course not only is developed in such a way that it achieves the ultimate goal, which is to prepare people for ops, but at the same time that it's part of a cohesive curriculum. And that's where the area coordinator and the instructional designer come in, to make sure this is part of a cohesive curriculum. So now I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Adams to continue, and then I'll pick up at the end.
Thank you, Dr. Griffin. Can we move forward to the next slide, because this is the previous slide? Thank you. Okay. So we really focused on 3 P's: the product, people, and process. Product is the curriculum. And as you know, the product is only as good as the faculty who teach it. It is not enough just to have an excellent product. You have to have the right faculty to teach it. So we made sure that we spend time to find qualified and motivated faculty to instruct graduate courses. We developed the curriculum matrices for credentialing that specify credentials and professional experience, and we categorized faculty as professionally qualified, academically qualified, and ideally qualified. Also, we use a collaborative approach to develop a set of instructional policies and teaching criteria for graduate faculty. And we really did it as a collaborative effort among all of the MBA and MHA faculty. So these policies were drafted, reviewed, vetted by and approved by both the MBA and MHA faculty. Then based on the teaching criteria, we developed the midterm quality assurance check process. All of the new faculty teaching the first time get checked during the first term, and then all of the faculty get checked once a year, and if they do poorly on the quality assurance check, then they are checked again in the near future. And we also developed a peer assessment process This process involves two anonymous peer faculty members who go into the course and check again against the quality assurance criteria on the courses that are already completed. Next slide, please. Can we advance to the next slide, please? No, yeah, this one. Okay. So next, we really needed to make sure that we have the structure necessary to accommodate the growth in the programs. Before, we had only the MHA program director, the MBA program director, and the program manager. So we added an associate dean position. We added an assistant director of academic operations position, and we cross-trained the staff to make sure that they cover for each other if there are planned or unplanned absences, and if help is needed during peaks and demand. Next. Next, we really looked at all of the processes, and we started really getting involved in all of the processes, beginning with marketing. This slide is a little small, so we provided in the handouts a large version of this table where you can see a large print. So as faculty, we segmented market into 5 segments: active undergraduate students, active graduate students, undergraduate alumni, graduate alumni, and industry professionals. So for all of the market segments, we utilize differentiated marketing strategy. And also we created an undifferentiated strategy for everybody. So in this table, all the activities that you see in red are the activities that only faculty do. And all of the activities that you see in green are the activities that are done by faculty in collaboration with other functional areas. There are no activities in this table that faculty are not involved in. So, for example, for active undergraduate students, what we do email blasts to promote graduate programs. We do email blasts to promote a 4+1 option. For active graduate students, we do email blasts to promote sequential degree options. Also, in your handouts, we provided some of the examples of these emails. I would like to notice, even right now, having this webinar, this would fall under our differentiated strategy in the right column. This is also an example when we do something to increase awareness about Park University graduate programs. And we, the faculty, do it. Next slide, please. Can we advance to the next slide, please? Okay, so the marketing plan is working to bring students in. Once they are admitted, maybe not registered yet, but maybe registered already. So how do we hold on to them? What do we do once we've got them? We use so-called teaching activities. Teaching activities are the activities to reach out to the new stars, to make sure that they know what to expect, to engage them and to keep them connected. So these are, we call them students. They're admitted, but they're really new stars. They did not start here. They're nervous. They have been out of school for quite some time. They're unsure about themselves. They may be actually got admitted into several universities. So these teaching activities are really designed to make sure that they begin feeling a part of Park University. We keep them connected. As faculty, we know that often if a student comes to the first class, first course, and sees something that the student did not expect before, then the student is more likely to drop. It is important for adult learners to actually know exactly what to expect to be successful. Next slide. More specifically about the teaching activities, we start early on. So we created 4 PowerPoint presentations, very brief, just basic presentations, and we start 4 weeks out before the first day of class, and send out the first presentation to all of the newly admitted students but not started yet. So it is information from your MHA program. It's just a welcome, some little information about our personnel, concentrations, sequential degree options, what the program is and what the program is not. It's brief, and the purpose of it is just to send an email and say, we're here if you have any questions. Then next 3 weeks before the start, we send out the second PowerPoint, getting off to a good start. A graphical model of the program, the course structure, course description, what's the textbook in the first course. In all of the core courses, we use LearnScapes, which are video simulations in a hospital setting, some tips for success. And again, it's an opportunity to respond and ask a question, to get engaged. 2 weeks before the start, we send the third presentation, setting up your Canvas profile. And then 1 week before the start, we send another presentation, important information about the first week, what to expect, that engagement is important, and some more information. Next slide, please. So as Dr. Griffin mentioned, with regard to retention, before this initiative, we as faculty really had no coordination with student success. And the students were able to drop the course without notifying faculty or the instructor. So what do we do now? We created so-called job management process. And so when the student sends a request to drop a course, now student success says, no, you need to talk to your instructor first. The instructor is provided the contact information for the student, so the instructor contacts the student or the student contacts the instructor and they talk. I, as an instructor, I can tell that typically what I hear from the new starts is just being nervous. When they open the course, when they see all of the content, they just get scared. And a lot of them say, oh, I cannot do it. And I have so many responsibilities, work full-time, several jobs, family responsibilities. And at that point, as an instructor, I have a chance to calm down a student. And I think when we talk, and I just ask a little bit information about the student and just kind of try to just be friendly. And I think hearing my friendly voice helps. Then I specifically ask about, so what's the problem? So they say, well, I'm going to travel for business. And I know that next week I'm just not going to be there. So as an instructor, I can right there offer extension and offer some help to make sure that hold on to the student, that the student stays in class. And so the student gets into the program and becomes successful. Next slide. And so here I will turn it over back to Dr. Griffin.
Okay, so here in this slide, what you see are kind of the before and after results. So we already showed kind of the 2012-13 academic year through 2014-15 stagnant growth. You see that for both the MHA and the MBA programs. But as of 15-16, this is when the faculty got involved. This is when we had that first meeting, went over the data from the prior 3 academic years, and began to put together and execute that list of 6 priorities. You see statistically significant growth from 2015-16, the academic year, through 2017-18. Statistically significant growth. We did an ANOVA analysis. It's strong growth. Now what you're seeing, and we see that across the board, so in headcount, credit hours for both programs. What we're seeing now, when we look at where we are 2018-19 relative to 2017-18, we're seeing the leveling off. This, and I drew it not very well because it was with the computer, but a line that looks like now an S curve. So this is an S curve that you're seeing in each of these results. And what we would expect to see, that eventually what happens is you're going to reach the maturity level of the S curve. You're going to reach that apex point where additional growth is probably not likely to take place. Instead, you're going to have to then fight to hold on to market share, to hold those numbers, because the inertia is going to be to head down to start the atrophy curve. So what the programs are doing now is focusing on what are some strategies they can do to stabilize these numbers so that they don't see some significant contraction. And now the program, the College of Management, has already rolled out a new MS and Information Systems and Business Analytics, which has been out and running now for a little over a year, which is gaining some traction. So as you do with products, when they're getting close to that maturity level, you roll out new products. But for these programs, it's now finding strategies that will help to hold off a decline in their market share. So one thing the faculty came up with is doing really an innovative strategy. One strategy. We said, look, we need to find some new funnel sources. We need to funnel in. We need people to work for us to help bring students into the program. We've had a lot of success with 4+1s, having undergrad students taking a certain amount of hours, up to 12 hours from the graduate programs, and using those to satisfy their undergrad requirements and give them that year head start on grad studies. So what the faculty came up with is an innovative agreement between, well, now one community college in Texas, Brazosport College, which is one of 4 colleges authorized to award baccalaureate degrees. So now Park has a partnership with Brazosport and have basically created a 4+1. So now Brazosport students in their senior year can take up to 12 hours from the graduate programs at Park University, use those 12 hours to satisfy their baccalaureate requirements to give them that 1-year head start into grad school. So it's the country's first 4+1 between 2 different universities, two different domestic universities. So, and because there's 22 states that allow community colleges to award baccalaureate degrees, or at least some community colleges in those states, this now creates an opportunity for them to recreate that same model with a number of other community colleges. So it's one funnel source. So it's about finding some innovative strategies. Keep doing what they're doing, but find some more innovative ways to have others working for them to bring students into the programs and to make sure to keep them financially viable, despite internal and external market conditions that are trying to pull their market share down. So that's the end of our formal presentation, but we certainly want to open this up for questions.
And I'm going to go ahead and unmute in case anybody wants to ask. And you can also address, Harold and Alla, you can also address any of the questions in the chat area that have not been addressed yet. So it is now unmuted. So if you have questions, you can go ahead and feel free to ask if you haven't already had those answered.
Yeah, hi, this is Jacobus Bickus at George Fox University. Thank you for an interesting presentation. I wanted to ask about other things that you measure. So you showed us how the enrollment responded, but you must be tracking other things like retention or satisfaction. How did that change, or did it change after the growth started?
Yeah, well, when we see the retention numbers are actually really good. That's how they're getting that's how we're achieving the growth year over year. So it's not only bringing in the new students, and what's attracting the new students are the options. So now we've got, there's 9 different concentrations available. We also have grad certificates in each of those concentrations. So having more product attracts, more students. They have more choice. But once they're in the program, the retention is really good. And that's why we're seeing that year over year growth, of course, up until this particular point. A little bit of, as we redeveloped the product and we changed it, we really redeveloped the curriculum substantially. Okay, it now has a synchronous component. It's got those team meetings where they have to meet each week. Those are video recorded. Team meetings where faculty go in and assess each individual's effort and contribution, give each individual student constructive feedback. So it's got elements, and that took a little bit. That caused a little bit of dissatisfaction at first because they were used to a completely asynchronous model. So it took transition, but now it's going really well. And the rankings are really good. So the MHA program is doing really well, according to U.S. News and World Report. Went from 92 last year to 82 this year. So we're starting to see some real good results. And of course, students are attracted to that. The fact that the industry is viewing the students in terms of their competencies as being where they should be, where they would expect them to be as they enter the market and as they continue to progress. That's helping to stimulate some additional, some growth.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Are there other questions?
Good morning. This is Virginia Rich from Caldwell University. I do have a question regarding the resources that you consulted regarding the attributes that you anticipate employers need from the MBA graduates.
Yeah.
Is there a white paper or other information that you'd be able to share with us? Because that is
sure.
a constant topic of discussion among us.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we'd be happy to do that, Virginia. If you send me an email, yeah, we pulled a number of articles, and not to mention just that, we've also been presenting in front of a number of industry leaders, large groups, and getting some feedback.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, there's this general perception that really a little bit of the blame game. The industry is saying, look, academics, it's your fault that we're seeing these folks coming out in the market and they don't have these skills, these soft skills. The hard skills are not worried about. They're easy to teach, they're easy to define, easy to teach. It's the soft skills, the essential skills that the students are really struggling with when they enter the job market. And so the industry says, look, it's your job as academics to make sure they have these requisite skills when they enter the market. And so it's kind of a shortcoming on our part. And of course, what we're saying is it's very hard to define soft skills. I mean, how do you operationally define them? And therefore, it's hard to even assess them. So there might be a tendency on our part to gravitate towards the technical skills, the functional skills that are easy to define and assess. But we've also been doing a lot of work on the soft skills. So we kind of integrated into this revamped curriculum. And we've been doing a lot of developing rubrics and then validating and establishing reliability on those rubrics to make sure that what we're doing is actually giving the students those soft skills. And so we'd be happy to share with you the literature that we reviewed as part of determining whether or not what we need to do differently to better prepare our students. Sure.
Thanks very much.
You're very welcome.
Any other questions? Okay. Hearing none, what we will do next is first I want to thank Dr. Griffin and Dr. Adams for their presentation and taking the time to do this for ACBSP. And then also to let you know that this information has been recorded. We'll send you a link as well as an evaluation form, and then you can go ahead and either download it or just listen to the webinar at another time directly from the link. If you didn't get the initial email that has the link to all the attachments, let us know that and we will resend that to you.
Diana, this is Harold.
Okay.
So did they also get a copy of the actual slides themselves in the attachment?
We will send the revised ones. We didn't, we had the previous version. This should be unmuted now if you want to try to go ahead and address the questions. Harold and Alla, can you see the questions in the chat area?
Yes, I see the questions. I was trying to address some of the questions in the chat.
Okay, let me see if I can get
But I
those
think
up.
there are more just popped
Okay.
up.
So it looks like question was, could Dr. Griffin also share those rubrics for the soft skills? That was a question from Nancy. And
sure. Well, can you hear me? You can hear me okay, huh?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Nancy, I think I can speak for Alla that we'd be happy to share with you those preliminary results. We've been presenting that at some large groups too, so we'd be happy to do that. We haven't published them yet, but we have the data and stuff we'd be happy to share.
Let's see, okay. And then another question we had was, what level of support do you receive from your adjunct faculty in these initiatives?
Oh my gosh. I think there's this perception that adjuncts just want to teach a course and that's it. You know, I've worked for a number of institutions and that we relied heavily on adjunct support. And they're usually, in my opinion, the first to volunteer. So they have been nothing but supportive. In fact, appreciative of the fact that we're including them in the decision-making process. I mean, everything, even if we're looking at rolling out a new concentration or a new degree, that's vetted through all the faculty, including the adjuncts, to determine whether or not they feel that's something we should even be willing or we should be considering. You know, so their involvement is absolutely instrumental, and they are more than willing to help. They're an excellent resource. So we've never had any issues with adjuncts not wanting to actively be a part of the processes, including volunteering their time on those redevelopment teams, those course redevelopment teams.
Okay, thank you. Another question here, and I think this would probably be the final question, is how did you get admissions and the leadership to buy into the idea of the program setting the admissions goals?
A little bit of pushback. I mean, so a little bit of pushback for sure. But once we get together and we start talking about it and say, look, we can't all have different goals. And that's what was happening. Academics, we had goals at the program level. Then they had their own separate goals, completely separate goals. Not only did they have separate admission goals, but they have separate retention goals. So everybody had their own. So when we got together we said, look, this just isn't going to work. We have to have some coordination here. So the agreement was that the programs would establish what the goals would be. And then we would vet those through the other functional areas, and then we would work from that. And so by doing that, that helped provide a little bit more continuity. It gave better consistency. And now everybody can be held accountable to a certain expectation that's consistent. They were just setting goals way too low relative to what we needed. I mean, like setting a retention goal at like 80%. So we're willing to lose 20%. Just things that are really, really not in to our advantage. So a little bit of pushback at first. But once you start to get together and start talking about where we need to be and how can we get there together, and start to say, look, well, where does it make sense that these goals originate? And ultimately, it should be the programs. So programs are the revenue centers. They're not the cost center. So admissions is a cost center. Student success is a cost center. The program is the revenue center. So the revenue center, they're the support. The revenue center needs to set those goals and targets. And the support services need to help provide the support necessary to meet those goals and targets. So that was the position that we took. And that seemed to work.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And that does, we are at our time limit, so to finish on time, we'll go ahead and conclude here. I want to thank you again for presenting and thank everyone for their participation. If you do not get a copy or an email from us with the link to download the recorded webinar, please let us know, either myself or Giles or Full, and we will make sure that you get that. So again, thank you very much for your participation. And with that, we will conclude the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.